Hello and good afternoon. I'm Mary McCormick, the Executive Director of the Rotary Club of Milwaukee, and it's my great pleasure today to welcome you to the Rotary Club of Milwaukee's fourth Thursday snack program. You may ask, what is a snack program? And I would say it's different than our lunch program in that there's a little bit less to it. You'll find it to be a little less formal than our Tuesday program. So there's no pledge, no invocation or club business, and it will typically last about 30 minutes. We'd like to feature members of Rotary or organizations affiliated with our Rotary members with ideas that are pertinent to how we're living today. If you have an idea you'd like to pitch, call or email me. We're also looking for programs that could be fun and entertaining. You could also just click on a link that came in that email before lunch and submit an idea that way. As I mentioned, this program is really intended to last about 30 minutes, but sometimes we find that the Q&A goes on longer. And so what we're going to do today is try something new. At about 12:30-ish, we're going to close the formal program down and switch the format. So those of you who want to stay and continue to engage with me and our speaker, you're welcome to do so. And if you want to move on, that would be fine too. So let me just say that we are really thrilled today to have with us Larry Strang, who is the president and Barton, I'm sorry, I wrote that down wrong. Larry Barton, who is the president and CEO of Strang, to help us think about how to get back to work safely. So with no further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Larry Barton. Thank you, Larry. Oh, Larry, you're still muted. Michelle, can you unmute Larry? Oh, there we go.
Okay, I assume you can hear me now?
Yep.
I was saying, Mary, you're not the first person to call me Larry Strang. I've been with Strang for 35 years, so people associate the two names pretty closely. But we'll jump right into the presentation here today. I'm going to share my screen. And basically, we've got 8 topics that we have a lot of our clients talk to us about. And not only are we in the process of returning our own staff to work, but we're also seeing that a lot of the people that we associate with and we deal with are having similar questions in terms of how to return to work effectively. We've got a lot of topics and a lot of slides. We might not get through them all, but that's okay. I think we're just going to kind of start and we'll go through and we'll stop at 20 minutes and see what kind of questions you might have. And let me advance my slides here. 1 second. Okay. So the first topic is really, for preparing to bring your workforce back to your work environments is to understand the various risks involved with bringing people back. And a part of that risk is to kind of understand what type of a business you are and whether you're at a low risk or a high risk type business. Now, most of the folks that we're talking to, they are part of an office type environment. That's what a lot of this presentation will be about, is kind of the office environment. And really, people in office or remote workers and some manufacturing facilities are in a lower category. Therefore, the types of recommendations and so forth aren't quite as severe as things like a medium risk hospitals and schools and things of that nature, where you have large groups of people interacting with a facility throughout the day. The other risk is not really related to the profession, but it's related to the people themselves that are your workforce. And as you're trying to decide how to bring people back in various phases, it's also good to understand the individual side of this, whether they're 65 years or older, whether they have health conditions. So as part of that decision, you'll definitely be thinking individually about each person too, and see if it's appropriate to bring them back early or to bring them back later in maybe a phase 2 or a phase 3. And then think about the employee themselves. There's employee perceptions that need to be addressed. And a lot of employees, including our own staff, they're concerned about safety, and they really want to understand and know that measures have been put in place to make sure that there's a safe work environment when they come back. Right now, they may be safer at home and feel real comfortable in a controlled environment, but as soon as they come back to work, they're depending upon others that they'll be working with to also help them provide that safe environment. The other thing that we're finding is that a lot of people, a lot of our workforce, they've been working at home for 8 or 9 weeks at this point. And a lot of them are finding that they're quite productive and they enjoy working at home. So we do have to kind of understand that their personal preference might be changing now to wanting to work at home more than in the office. And we're finding the opposite of that true as well, that a lot of people are working at home and there's a lot of distractions at home, and the workstations aren't set up as well, and they want to get back to the office as quickly as possible. So understanding the psychological side of this is important as you're trying to decide who to bring back and how soon. There's a business side to deciding who to bring back and at what pace. You will find that some of your staff and some of your job positions are quite productive working at home, and some staff are kind of equally productive, and other staff actually are much more productive within the office, just based upon the equipment that they need to use and so forth. So the business side of this would be to think about getting the people into the positions where they're most productive, whether that's continuing to work from home for a period of time or bringing them back to the office as soon as possible. The profitability side becomes part of that discussion. You're trying to put people into the most productive roles possible, and the best locations. Ideally, that would be on a voluntary basis, so that you're not, making people work in environments that they're concerned with, either for safety or that they don't feel that they'd be most productive. And then there is a recruitment and retention side to this now. Now that employees have had a taste of working at home for a couple of months now, they may actually get more vocal and a little more demanding that some of the pre-existing rules in terms of working from home are relaxed somewhat, because they are finding it to be preferable and maybe even more productive. So that can work to your favor by taking a look at some of those HR policies and seeing if you can use them as an actual advantage now that you've kind of proven to yourselves that there is a possibility of this mixture of working from home and working in the office. So then how do you phase people back? The Badger Bounce Back Plan kind of offers a 3-step approach to phasing. And phase 1 is kind of a limited bring back of maybe a quarter, 25% of your workforce and so forth. And that's basically for the purpose of social distancing, so that you don't get your full workforce back into the office and struggle with social distancing. Voluntary versus mandatory is a decision I think every business needs to make. The voluntary return is good for the employees. It doesn't put a lot of pressure on them and allows them to make their decisions. And for the first phase, it can be effective, meaning people would make their personal choice, and generally you're not trying to bring back a large number of people into your firm. There's ways of bringing the entire staff back into the office just by staggering the days in the office. So you could bring some of your staff back on some days and others back on other days. There's a 10-4-2 week cycle, which is kind of interesting that they're using in Europe. That's a method of having staff work in the office for 4 days, and then the 5th day work at home, and the following week work at home. That has some advantages in terms of actually controlling the spread of the virus. And then shift work, of course, you can bring back some employees in the mornings and some in the afternoons as a way of kind of allowing staff exposure to the office and kind of bringing them back a little slower. Social distancing has a lot to do with phasing because you're trying to limit the number of people in any confined space. And when you talk about social distancing, we like you to think of it from the time they leave their home in the morning until they return home at night. Think about the entire travel package, how they're arriving at work, whether they're arriving in parking structures or by public transportation. Think about that pathway into the office space. You're trying to maintain social distancing and some limiting the number of touch points and things along the way at entrance doors, stairwells, elevators, and so forth. So social distancing isn't just within the office. And when we're evaluating how many people can you bring back and still maintain good social distancing, we tend to use diagrams like this to evaluate it. And once we understand what the workstations are that people are using within their facilities, we can start to diagram out what a 6-foot clearance would look like around a workstation. So in this diagram, the dark red represents 6-foot diameter around where a person sits at their workstation. But the lighter red indicates the movement back and forth around that workstation. And what you'll find is that anything beyond about a 6-foot by 6-foot workstation works, but only for about 50% of the workforce returning. In other more tighter workstation arrangements, you'll see that the percentage of people that can be accommodated actually goes down quite a bit. These are just diagrams to help you understand each space within your office. In terms of private offices, where you used to be able to accommodate more people and maybe some side desks so that these smaller offices might get a little tight. Generally, what we're seeing is that you need to almost label some of these rooms for maximum occupants during the phase 1 and phase 2 return. Open office studies are where a lot of attention is placed. In this case, this is our office, and we have about 50 people in a confined space. Might be representative of some of your work environments. But what we find is in our workstations, the green dots would represent stations that we could be accommodated with a 6-foot social distancing. The red dots would be stations that we couldn't. And one thing that that we're learning is that sharing of workstations is definitely discouraged. So if you have a situation like this, you can either suggest you could bring back comfortably about half of your staff, if this was the arrangement. You could also use these different shifts and so forth. So you could bring back some people in the green workstations on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and maybe in the red workstations on alternating days. In doing so, you'd maintain a good social distancing. You could do the same thing with morning shifts and evening shifts. Looking at other spaces like your conference rooms and so forth, same kind of strategy. Maybe you would place occupancy signs on each of your conferencing areas. Generally, we think they're still very usable and functional. With social distancing, you just have to treat them a little differently and not put quite so many people in each space when you're using them. This one is break rooms. Break rooms generally can accommodate social distancing, but there's going to be a lot of cleaning and disinfecting protocol that you'll want to layer on top of your social distancing in a space like this. So I'm just going through this in kind of broad brush overview to get the subject matter on the table. Your reception area and your receiving of guests and so forth is really something that should be looked at. Not only will you want to protect the receptionist because that's somebody that's in a somewhat vulnerable position receiving desks or guests, but also your waiting areas. won't be able to use all of the seating. Restrooms too should maintain some social distancing and maybe even put limits on that in terms of 1 or 2 people in a restroom at a time, just to control that a little better. And all of that social distancing kind of leads towards the concept of distributed work practices, and how those distributed work practices kind of coincide with working from home and then working in the office, and the balance of that with your workforce somewhat distributed in both locations. Um, Interesting statistic here, and this was from Robert Half, a staffing agency, but they, as workers have now been working from home for quite some time, had a survey, and it suggested that 79% of the people working from home now want their employers to allow more of it after they come back to work. 70% prefer holding fewer of these in-person meetings. And then this concept of staggering work schedules and more flexibility in work schedules is just something that we think the workforce is going to desire, and probably be a little more vocal in requesting moving forward. Certainly a lot of advantages and disadvantages in terms of working from home or working in the office. The the advantages of working in the office, so that's where all the equipment is, that's where your most robust technology is, that's where you can collaborate face to face. But in our current period, this social distancing creates challenges that we need to deal with. Working from home has a lot of advantages, reduction of travel time and so forth, but there are issues with the technology that people are using from home, and just the efficiency of electronic meetings and so forth. So generally, when we're talking to people, we're trying to make best use of the office space and these collaborative zones within there where people can still use them. They just have to use them differently than they have in the past. And basically that gets down to collaboration. Right now, with everybody working from home, we're limited to electronic collaboration. We don't see that as probably the most effective forms of collaboration, whereas in office face-to-face actually has some advantages. I think I'll I'll skip a couple slides here and say, this image here is a good example of how you would take a meeting room that might handle 25 people normally, but during this time of social distancing, still continue to use it, just with fewer people, and then realizing that some of the people that you're collaborating with will also be electronically brought into these meetings. So you don't have to shut down your whole office, you just have to use it a little differently. And by differently, that means protocol. That means making people wash their hands regularly. It means maybe having some wipes available when people enter a room, having people wipe things on before and after meetings and things of that nature. So these are things that, would allow collaboration still to occur and occur effectively, but done in a safe way. And then when it comes to safety and wellness, generally the OSHA has prioritized the most effective strategies. And I can go through these fairly quickly, but the best thing to do is to actually remove a hazard. So if you have a room that's you consider hazardous, close down the room. Engineered controls are these things like divider panels and things that you can put between workstations. They're not as effective as removing, but they're still effective. Controls and policies and procedures are the third most effective, and mainly they suffer from just human nature. And the same thing with safe work practices. The more we involve and expect humans to kind of interact and follow policies and do things correctly, the more chance that they won't be followed. Quite surprisingly, OSHA is suggesting PPE like face masks and gloves are actually at the lowest end of effective strategies, which I think is probably counter to what most people understand. And so as we think about how to approach this as a business, definitely put most of your effort and focus on these top issues. Hazards could be things like just removing shared things from your office space, like shared mugs and utensils, and even shared resources like books and things. Engineered controls can be these different types of panels, which can be either more permanent or more or temporary, almost throwaway, like the cardboard one on the top. Administrative controls are all the things that we would do in terms of signage and things of that nature within the office. Safe work practices most people are familiar with, hand washing, covering coughs, adhering to social distancing. And then just general wellness, don't give up on the wellness strategies you already had in your business. There's still things you can do with fitness, with outdoor activities and events and so forth. I'm probably running up against my 20 minutes, so Mary might want to stop me, which would be perfectly okay. I just got cleaning and so forth, which is much more
Well,
detailed subject.
right. So maybe we should just take a pause here and see if we get some questions coming in on the chat, Larry. I think that could be really helpful. One
Okay.
thing that we didn't talk about at the beginning is really tell us just a bit about Strang.
Strang's an architecture, engineering, interior design firm, and we have offices in Waukesha and Madison. Been around 85 years. We do tend to specialize in the corporate office environment, like we're talking about today, but we also do research labs, higher education, performing arts, projects of that nature. So,
Good. Well, thank you. When you were talking about the different phasing strategies, you mentioned a strategy that was being tried in Europe, and that sounded somewhat intriguing. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about that?
yeah, I can do that. Uh, the phasing strategies generally have been an effort to reduce the number of people in a confined space at a given time. So by just bringing back social distancing and limiting the number of people in an office and so forth, it achieved that. But it really didn't directly impact the way the virus gets spread. So one of the strategies that I had mentioned briefly was the 10-4 strategy.
Mhm.
And that basically means you would, on a 2-week cycle, you would have an employee work in the office for 4 consecutive days and then work from home for the 6 days following. And then with the weekends, that ends up being a 14-day cycle or a 2-week cycle. In doing that, they can dramatically reduce the opportunity for people to obtain the virus but not be aware of it, and then continually return back to the office and spread that virus without knowing it. Uh, the idea is that in a 4-day period, the person might contract the virus within that 4-day period but not have symptoms. But then in the following 10 days, those symptoms would most definitely materialize, and then they could be quarantined without returning to the office and continuing to spread that virus. Doesn't eliminate it, but it reduces the possibility significantly.
Seemed like a nice creative strategy to explore for people that can do that. Our president, Steve, has a question here. Many office buildings don't have windows that open. How dangerous do you view ventilation to be, and how can it be improved short of major expense?
Yeah, I probably had a slide on that here. The building systems, really you wouldn't need to, for the sake of this pandemic, make major modifications to your existing mechanical systems. Generally, what's being discussed is to increase the ventilation level, and most mechanical systems are allowed to bring in more fresh air than maybe they're currently set at. So that's usually the first thing that you would do, look at your ventilation rates and try to introduce more fresh air into the system, or more air changes is another way of saying that. The other thing you'd want to look at is the types of filters that you're using within the mechanical system. And there's what they call MERV ratings. And you would look at upgrading your MERV rating as much as you can within the system's parameters. You can't just haphazardly replace it to the highest level because it might impact other aspects of the system. But working with your manufacturer, look for an upgraded filter system. And then the other thing is if you have humidity control, maintaining a healthy humidity range, I think between 40 and 60% are some of those things you can do without major retrofits to your mechanical systems. There's other strategies, but they're less tested. So they might help, but they're not being necessarily approved, through OSHA or the CDC at this point, or ASHRAE is the other mechanical system group.
Yeah, well, those are, that's a very thoughtful answer. What are the ideas to balance health and safety with environmental considerations? Like example, using single-use cups versus multi-use or shared cups into the dishwasher at the office?
Yeah, good question. And that might have been some of these things that I was going to talk about.
Oh, we're going to cover them now.
Yeah, well, that's good.
That's good.
The well building standard is a standard that's similar to LEED, and I think people are familiar with LEED. They're maybe not as familiar with the well building standard, but well building kind of thinks about health and wellness within the entire facility from all aspects. Nutrition is part of that, fitness, and so forth. Let's see. I'll use cleaning products and so forth are part of wellness. And how often you disinfect your facility is a wellness thing that has some controversy in terms of over disinfecting can actually be a negative as well to some effect. The well building standard has a whole list of approved cleaning products and disinfecting products, as does OSHA or the EPA. And if you compare those two, you will find products that are on both lists. So that's a good start, is to do that. In terms of sustainability and safety when it comes to the COVID-19 virus, I know in our office, the safety is overriding the convenience of shared mugs and dishwashers and things of that nature. We're saying that safety first is going to be the priority for a period of time. So we've literally removed the hazard and removed all of the mugs and the utensils and things, and we're going strictly with, green disposables, recyclable disposables. There's other aspects to that too in terms of food within the office space. You really want to discourage kind of those communal meals that are popular within the office environment, and encourage people to a large extent to bring in their own individual lunches and kind of keep that food consolidated to their area. We're also allowing people to eat at their desks. Again, just trying to contain their safe space and not kind of commingle with a lot of other exchange of food and things of that nature.
Yeah, it's amazing how you really have to take it down to the micro level on so many decisions that we're going to make. Chris Hendricks says, how do you see businesses like yours promoting and enhancing teamwork when you have staff working staggered days and remotely?
Yeah, working remotely just becomes a blend. I mean, working remotely and having some of your staff in the office and some of your staff working remotely, I think is just a blended collaboration of having face-to-face meetings in training centers and in conference rooms, but limiting the number of people in those spaces with social distancing, and then bringing other people in electronically. The other thing I'd say about that is that for the time being, the safest thing to do is to continue to do as much electronic collaboration as possible. And then when that's just not efficient, let's say you're doing a visioning session or a very creative kind of a session, which we do in the office all the time. It's just more effective to be huddled in a room and the give and take of people talking back and forth. In those situations, still do it, but just do it in a safe way. Put those people in the largest room that you have available and maintain social distancing, and have a protocol in place of, you know, wiping down your area before and after you have that meeting. So I think you can do it. It's just, you just have to adapt in a safe way.
I thought the slide that you showed with the conference room with people both in the room and coming in remotely was an interesting blend of people working together too.
Yeah, I think really this is the solution, and it's use these rooms safely, but you know, certainly don't shut down half your office. It's probably not necessary as long as people follow the protocol.
Well, we're coming on 12:30, and so Larry, I thought this was a very informative and helpful presentation. It certainly gave me some food for thought, and I'm going to share your slides and this link with some friends. Somebody did just ask for the slides, and I'll just tell everyone that they are available. They were included in the link that went out before lunch. We will also post them in the email that we sent out tomorrow morning. And so you'll have multiple options to look at Larry's slides, listen to this again, and share it with friends. So thank you, Larry, for being here. And I think that Michelle's going to close down this part of the program, and those who would like to stay and chat with you a little bit longer are welcome to do so. So let's have a little virtual applause here before we sign off. So